Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel on COVID-19 safety precautions on film productions. I'm here with three amazing reps from three different film institutions across Canada, and we're excited to chat with you today about the COVID situation and film productions. So I am going to let our panelists introduce themselves, their organization, and maybe just give a brief overview of how your organization has been involved with developing safety guidelines or precautions. So Nicole?
Okay, well, good morning. My name is Nicole Madiation, and I'm the Executive Director of Onscreen Manitoba. Bonjour, and thank you for having me here. Onscreen Manitoba is an industry association, so our membership includes filmmakers, producers, writers, directors, the unions, film festivals, training organizations. We really have a role of working with everybody in the community. The film commissions also are an important part of our community, and that we work very closely with them. And in terms of developing the COVID-19 safety guidelines in Manitoba, we worked with all of the stakeholders in the community to come up with the guidelines. And as we get into the discussion, I'll get into a little more detail about how we really went about it. Thank you for having me this morning.
Sure, thank you. Hugh?
Ulakut, Boreda, good morning. Good morning to you all from Nunavut. So Nunavut Film Development Corporation, we are the funding agency for screen-based media activities in Nunavut. We're also the Film Commission for Nunavut, and we also are the training body for industry training for Nunavut. Just to give us a bit of a context, I think that Nunavut is different to other jurisdictions in Canada. We are currently COVID-free. There are no active cases in Nunavut. And that's relevant to the 25 communities of Nunavut. Long may it last. Who knows what's going to happen for the future. The other important element is that we are basically, the borders are closed. So only Nunavut residents and critical workers are allowed to travel to Nunavut. And you first of all have to receive permission from the Department of Health to travel to Nunavut. And if you are successful in your application, then you have to isolate at one of the designated hub hotels. So you would spend 2 weeks isolating before you could actually fly to Nunavut. That basically, in the context of this conversation, there are no guest productions allowed to come from the south or overseas into Nunavut. And this has been the case since March and isn't likely to end anytime soon. And we can go into more detail later on.
Absolutely, thank you, Hugh. And Marnie, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Marnie G, and I'm the BC Film Commissioner and Director of Production Services with Creative BC. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am joining you here today from the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations. So we have worked very closely with our labor organizations and industry associations here in British Columbia, the studios, CMPA, and our colleagues across Canada, really, in all the other provinces and territories as well. There's a lot of phone calls, Zoom calls. I'd say one silver lining was really seeing strength and unity in terms of the organizations across the country. So we worked together to build a number of sort of different levels of COVID safety protocols. Quite different from certainly from Hugh. British Columbia has seen a really our safe return to operations and productions has really spiked. So we are busier than we've ever been here in BC, and I can get into a little bit more of that later. But through working collaboratively with our labor organizations, we built safety protocols that were reviewed and more or less approved by the government. And we are also able to work very closely with WorkSafe BC, which is our organization that oversees job sites. So in designing our health and safety protocols, we were able to work closely with them, and they helped give some really good guidance in terms of what it would look like for film production to return to safe operations in terms of getting back up and running here. So probably very similar to other, both to Nicole and Hugh in terms of that, although it's a little different for Hugh, I know, because there isn't any outside production happening.
Yeah, it's very complicated, obviously, and we know the situation is different province to province, territory to territory. Nicole, did you want to just quickly touch on the situation in Manitoba, Winnipeg? Are you allowing outside productions? Yeah, just a quick overview of that.
Yeah, for sure. So Manitoba was one of the first provinces to open production up again. We moved into phase 2 of our restart program in the province in June. So certainly there were commercials and small documentaries that began shooting very quickly after the go-ahead was given. And then over the summer period, we've seen an increasing number of productions. So prior to all of that happening, we were already working very closely with a variety of stakeholders. In our process, we researched first with, we were doing our research across the country with our colleagues, of course. As Marnie said, there was a lot of exchanging as people were trying to identify the best way forward. We then leaned in and worked with some production companies on a producer committee where they'd started drawing up their own protocols in the hopes that there would be an opportunity to go back to work. And it was a very collaborative and generous process where production companies who had, made significant investments in terms of researching how to do, how best to manage a production in the COVID time, really just put it all out on the table, and we looked at it and came up with our overarching guidelines for the province. Those were then circulated to the film commissions and the labor organizations and government. And then the government came out with their minimum guidelines. And our guide became a complementary document to that. So of course, it includes the minimum guidelines. And then a few areas where we pushed a little farther. So for example, in the government guidelines, it says to wear a mask, a non-medical mask if you can't physical distance, 2 meters, et cetera. But in practice, and really from the beginning, even though productions have been working with cohorts, have been being very careful to practice physical distancing and introducing all of those measures, it's basically become common practice to wear a mask on set all the time. It's just that added level of comfort and protection. So certainly we're seeing why, just everybody really is wearing a non-medical mask on set. At the same time, all of the physical distancing and cohort management techniques are being used. You have to be screened to do your self-screening, and then you check in when you arrive on set. You confirm that you've done the self-screening. Many productions are doing temperature checks also. And now we're starting to see also increasingly the introduction of testing on set, and that's dependent on the production and what requirements they put in place, and who they're working with. Certainly among the actors, there's sort of there is a bit more of a focus around that. Of course, they're much more exposed. And everybody is really just trying to make sure that we can keep each other safe. It's been a very collaborative process. And it really has been about bringing together people to talk about how to do things best. And it's an ongoing process. So what I described was taking place in May and June, but we've continued the conversations and we've done updates to our guidelines in the, again in the summer, again, just recently, just sort of adding in more best practices. We've, developed a job description for the COVID-19 supervisor because everyone was wanting to include one on the larger productions, but not really, it's a brand new position. We're all trying to to find solutions to it. And I'm sure, Marnie, you've had some of this experience also in BC, but we're very grateful to be working.
Yeah, I wonder, Marnie, if you want to just sort of touch on that, because you do have productions going in BC as it does Manitoba. What are some of the precautions people are taking there, and have your guidelines sort of had to evolve as well as
Sure. Yeah. Well, very similar again to what Nicole is speaking of in terms of it really was something that you needed everyone involved. So all of our labor organizations. We built a set of guidelines that really was to show our provincial government that the industry, although they were never ordered to close here in British Columbia, they closed voluntarily. Well, I think obviously globally that happened with production. So we weren't restricted. The industry wasn't restricted in that way, but we wanted to make sure that we could showcase all of the health and safety protocols that industry was going to do. So that was quite the feat, I'll tell you. I chaired the BC Motion Picture Best Practices COVID-19 Safety Coalition. It just rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? So that was about 50 people. And there was a large presence from the studio labor reps out of Los Angeles. And so it was it was a feisty group, let me tell you that. And then we had, of course, all of our labor reps here in British Columbia. We did have someone from WorkSafe BC that just sat in on the calls with us. And my team, our team at the Film Commission was amazing through that process as well. So we built about a 13-page document that really was quite high level. It was really based off of the health and safety protocols that WorkSafe BC put out. And that went to the provincial government. It took a long time to help everyone understand that it wasn't an approval process. So a lot of the studios wanted to say, here's our document, can you stamp it and approve it? And both the province and WorkSafe BC was very clear that everyone needed to be responsible and accountable for their own health and safety protocols on set. And it wasn't something that people were going to say, here's a check, you're good to go. So that was a big part of the conversation. So that went to government. That was approved, I think, the middle of June. And right away, that same group started working on the pandemic production guide, which was really more for producers. And probably really more for domestic production in the province. So, a lot of the larger studios that we work with here in British Columbia have got massive teams that would build out these, very litigious health and safety protocols that each production, Warner Brothers has got 9 shows in British Columbia. So they all had, sort of the handbook. So for some of the domestic productions, we really wanted to make sure that everyone had access to health and safety protocols and really more departmental specific. So, how does hair makeup work beyond washing your hands and, wearing PPE when you can't safely social distance in terms of, the application of products and transportation, and how do you move a crew from crew park over to, a set, and all of those pieces. Tech surveys, is everyone self-driving? How is this going to work? We started really looking at like LiDAR, location photography and that kind of thing. So that's still, all of those conversations are still ongoing, but we have figured it out. And again, really speaks to the commitment and the level of collaboration. So the pandemic production guide really was seen as a living document. And again, there was, depending on which labor organizations or studio, everyone was very passionate about keeping people safe. And I think because this is something no one had ever gone through before, obviously there was a real sense of, are we doing the right thing? Should we be going back to work? Is this a safe place for everyone to go home to their families and come back? And in working with municipalities and cities and film offices around all of those conversations as well, in terms of public spaces or plazas. So the pandemic production guide is out here in BC, and both of those guides are up on our website. And then it was, we really thought the 14-day quarantine in BC, or obviously in Canada, was going to be more impactful. And we certainly had, understandably, a lot of outreach from the studios saying, is there a way around it? And what if they come in and they get tested? And of course, here in BC, our public health officer doesn't support asymptomatic testing. So in a way, it made it a very easy conversation for us, because it was like, you'd sort of listen and say, our public health officer doesn't support asymptomatic testing, because there's sort of, well, they could come in, they get tested on Monday, and then we just would keep saying, and finally, after a few weeks, I think it really hit. So we've been fortunate. The studios have all been adhering to that 14-day quarantine, as they absolutely should. And it seems to be going well in terms of that. So we have been, there has been a few cases, and that we were all really freaked out about, more than anything, press grabbing that and saying, there's a massive outbreak on a film set. And that happened. It wasn't a massive outbreak. It was one person. But it was handled well. And we worked really closely again with our Ministry of Health. I can't, the amount of time they spent with our team, with our CEO, Prem Gill, and myself on the phone, fielding the questions from productions, both on the ground and domestic and out of Los Angeles, with all the intricacies of testing and not testing, and symptoms, asymptomatic and not, and if you get tested once and it's negative and you still need to self-isolate, just endless questions, and we've been all going through them, I'm sure. So just as they're trying to manage, public health at a pandemic, they still found time to speak with us. So I just huge shout out to the provincial government for that, and our Vancouver Coastal Health and Fraser Health have just been amazing. So it's happened, and no production has really gone down because of that. There's been some self-isolation, but they've managed to keep going. It's certainly only been a couple of times that's happened. We did run into, which I can speak about or not, a few weeks ago, just a backlog of testing. Because we have so many foreign production or international production out of Los Angeles, MPA studios, and the agreement between the labor organizations in the United States and the studios with testing and the frequency of testing, we sort of ran in, and it was a myriad of reasons, again, depending on which article you read, that got us to that point. But we did see, probably a dozen productions that had to pause because of the backlog of testing, which again, I'm happy to speak more about, but I know I've been rambling on for a few minutes now, so.
No, of course, we can definitely return to that. I just wanted to go a little into, I think you've all mentioned how collaborative this process was. And I think necessarily, as you mentioned, it's not just a stamp and a check mark for safety. No. Everybody has to be sort of almost individually responsible. So Hugh, I'm wondering if you could speak about the decision to sort of shut down outside productions in Nunavut. How did that come about? How quickly did that come about? Was it something that was advocated for? Yeah, if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and before I go on to that, Adriana, I just want to kind of pay tribute to the collaboration, because Manny and I, we took part in many meetings with APTFA, and APTFA is the Association of Provincial and Territorial Film Agencies, and that's led by Prem Gill from BC, who did an outstanding job, and it was wonderful, actually. I mean, if there was some good news that's come out of this this period, was the information sharing and the willingness to help other provinces and territories. And obviously, I mean, when you look at and when you compare the size of an institution such as Creative BC and Manitoba Film, for example, compared to Nunavut Film, Northwest Territories and Yukon, we are, you can count them on one hand, how many of us are there. And it was fantastic, actually, to have the conversations that we had, the sharing of information. So anyway, that was nothing at all to do with your question, Adriana, but I just wanted to say that anyway. So to answer your question, I mean, the decision was made for us in many ways. And Nunavut being in a unique position, there was a decision in March to lock down the territory. So it was, how can I put it? It was a decree rather than a consultation, because the decision had been made by government, and it was up to us then to follow the guidance and to prepare our production guidelines, which takes me back to the wonderful support that we had from, especially the guidance from BC Ontario and Manitoba, they were ahead of the game. And they were so generous in sharing their experiences. For us, in a way, writing a guideline was quite straightforward because the hard work had been prepared by people like Marnie in BC. So that was the first thing that we did. Really, we sent out a document to the industry outlining the impact of the government's decision. Secondly, we moved swiftly to draft a production guidelines. And again, to emphasize the difference, knowing that there would be no large productions happening in Nunavut, we concentrated basically on field productions, kind of, at the most 2-man videographers with supporting crew. So we concentrated on that and prepared the guidelines. And then as a funding agency, so we give out grant funding. So the first thing we did was to create a new fund, which we called the Storytelling Fund, because most of our traditional funds had to do with production spends, the usual short films, etc. So we had to then create a new fund that would promote, if I can put it, self-isolation activities. And that included, I don't know how many producers say, oh, I've got this so much archive sitting in the office and I've never had time to edit and to make copies and to give them back to the communities. There's some wonderful elder interviews, etc. So we created a fund that would promote any kind of self-distancing activity. And it was great, actually, because, as happens with any agency, you have your funding programs. They've existed for a while. They don't necessarily reflect, the huge changes that are happening in screen-based industry. So while it was a challenge, it was a great opportunity for us to actually create the fund that didn't do that kind of activity anywhere else at any other time. And it's been a great success. So that's where we're at the moment.
It's wonderful to hear about that fund. That's such a great initiative, and sort of a bright spot in I guess the darkness of the COVID landscape, that people are now able to dedicate time to doing projects like that. That's amazing. I guess Nicole and Marnie, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to all the research that went into developing guidelines that did have to cover like very large productions. I think Marnie, you touched on it a bit, like you have to consider, every single step of the way. Like, are people carpooling together? That's a possible contact point. Hair and makeup, craft services. So could you maybe speak to parsing out all those different aspects of a production and how you kind of approach that?
Sure. We, again, because we were starting with protocols that production companies had put together based on productions that they were expecting would go forward, hopefully go forward. I mean, really in the period when we were working on this, there was a lot of hope involved. So it was a very practical approach. One of the companies worked with an epidemiologist, so they had really in-depth knowledge that they were able to bring forward. And this was really helpful. And then really, we just went through department by department. Now, the guidelines that we have on our website are higher level, not as high level as what's on the government website. Ours are a little more in-depth, like clearly very film focused. And we do have guidelines for some specific departments within the guidelines themselves. So key things, certainly in terms of hair and makeup and having to be very close to people to do your job. And certainly around catering and transportation, because those were all very, sort of high risk, high contact parts of the work. And then more recently, we've been developing guidelines for other departments. So we've even, actually done sort of a little mini pullout guide. So if you're in the transport department, you can look at this, and it's really more directed specifically at what you're going to encounter. So that's a bit of an ongoing project. And again, it is a living document. It's constantly updated. And part of having the departments separated out is so that we can do those updates a little more quickly than for the guide itself, where we've got a bigger number of people need to take a look at it before we can get out, rather than work directly with the departments. We're also working very closely with Safe Work Manitoba, which is the education arm of workplace safety and health in Manitoba. And they were really great about coming in early on with us. And they put together an online course on COVID-19 safety and supervision, so for supervisors. So it was actually a really unique opportunity to have a large number of people working in the industry take a course on how to be a good supervisor and what to think about from a safety perspective in general within the context of COVID-19. So suddenly, over 200 people that, it was a good idea that they would take that course. It's not a required course, but suddenly we've sort of had this opportunity to increase capacity at the supervisor level, or just people who are interested in moving ahead in their careers. And we also organized another sort of introduction to COVID safety and health online course that many, many, many more people took. And that one was really about, so what do you mean, so what does good hygiene, what does good hand hygiene mean? How are we supposed to clean these surfaces? It really sort of dug into that side of things, and was run by a very experienced production manager. And so we've got actually 2 production managers in the community that can run that course now. And it's been offered a couple of times now also to individual production companies. As they were moving into production, they sort of wanted a brush up, or there were new people or not enough people they felt had taken the course. So it's quite adaptable to the need as it arises. Again, it just goes back to the collaboration. And those courses we're offering with an organization in Manitoba called Film Training Manitoba. They do our SIT orientation course, and they've been great partners in terms of getting that kind of online training out there quickly, that really backed up the guide and communicated how to use it.
Oh, I was muted. That's great. Marnie, did you want to add to any of that on the BC side?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I was certainly very much a part of the safety guidelines, the sort of higher level document that we built with that group of 50, that the pandemic production guide and getting into the departmental specific was really built by the departments and by the labor organizations themselves. They did have, and also with ActSafe, we're very fortunate to have an organization here called ActSafe, which is an arm of WorkSafe BC, but it's specific to motion picture and theater here. And that team, Manu and Anand, were amazing, and certainly sort of that thread through the whole process, and still continue to be. So they worked, and they did it in Ontario as well. I mean, it just blows my mind when you think about the amount of work and people that went into it. I think there was 14 different subcommittees with 10 to 12 people on each one, and it was done with our CMPA people here in British Columbia, with Jason Lee and Marcia Newberry, and our Council of Unions director, Paul Clausen. I'm just saying their names because they definitely deserve the credit. I mean, I was like on the sidelines to this whole thing. And certainly, as we were sort of that streamline as always as the Film Commission to government and back to the studios in terms of what what's happening with the process. But those people worked so hard, weekends, nights, you can imagine 12 people, but it was the department head, it was the experts, the professionals that built these guidelines that would really understand, what needed to happen in terms of that work and how you were going to interpret it or change it or shift it in, the COVID world that we're living in right now. So it was a massive group of people, and again, to the collaboration piece of that. So I, thank goodness, I could say for my own self, was not involved in any of those departmental specific conversations, but they all happened. And I know they were difficult at times because you had, various labor organizations that maybe that department fell within one labor organization, like say hair makeup, but they're working very closely with UBCP, which is our ACTRA and actors union that, it's going to directly impact those members. So, there's lots of lively conversations, as there always is, but respectful, and they got it done. So, things like figuring out again, and it really is more of those larger 150 crew. How are you going to get them from place to place? They're renting, buses, and they figured it out, somehow, but it's all done within, again, working with WorkSafe BC, ActSafe with our Ministry of Health, research, access to research and information in terms of transmission. And again, just massive kudos to our provincial government and to Dr. Bonnie Henry, because her calm demeanor really allowed industry and our labor organizations to say, we support it, we stand behind it. And that was really, really important as we were as building out these health and safety protocols. So yeah, and I just wanted to touch quickly because it made me think about it in terms of all the health and safety protocols. And I know that Manitoba is working with us on the Real Green initiative. So there's been so much work done in the for decades, but really in the last few years around sustainability and production. And again, with partnership and collaboration, we're really starting to all the provinces have got a lens on that. So it was. Looking at that, thinking, how are we going to now go to like disposable everything? We're going to go 50 years backwards by, having water bottles and plastic gloves and masks everywhere. But we worked with our Real Green team and Zena Harris, who's been the lead on that initiative for us here in British Columbia, and built a set of sustainability guidelines to work within COVID. And that's, that again is a living document that's changing. But it was one of the conversations that, we've been pretty passionate here in British Columbia about. So obviously safety first, but then looking at how do we still maintain being sustainable in production as well. So that's, again, shifting and changing always as we go. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah.
Could I just jump in for a minute? Because I just want to say it's been, there's also been a lot of conversation around sustainability in Manitoba with the producers and the unions, and we're so pleased that Manitoba Film and Music, which is the funding agency and film commission in Manitoba, so separate from my organization, which is the Industry Association, and they have also played that kind of leadership role in bringing in the Green Initiative with, in partnership with BC, and also as being our, within the COVID context, being the conduit with Manitoba Public Health. But just starting, now that production is continuing and we've kind of stabilized in terms of how best to move forward, it's really refreshing to be able to start talking again about sustainability and helping people to find how to manage that within this context, because there's a really high interest, of course, on the part of everybody working in the industry. And it's I think we can build on the collaboration that we've just experienced through managing COVID-19 to take it further.
I just, and to Hugh's point, and we just keep talking about the collaboration. I mean, I think it's something that has always been there, and it's sort of really come to light, and it's as it should be. Absolutely. I appreciate the kudos, Hugh, but that we all are going to be stronger and better as a nation and as a country, and certainly as a jurisdiction for production, both domestically and foreign. And we actually are just looking at pulling together a national Real Green advisory committee. So across the country, all of the film commissions, film offices, et cetera, talking about sustainable production in the province. And that's, so we're talking to Ontario and obviously to Rachel and Louise in Manitoba, and through the groups like APFA, again, where we've brought all the funding and provincial film commissions together. So it's a really good time to be, it's an extremely important conversation to be having. So
Yeah, it's so heartening to hear that things like sustainability are still being considered and worked into these guidelines. So I'm wondering, for all three of you, obviously there's a lot of changes to film productions that we're probably hoping are temporary. I'm wondering if there are any changes that you're hoping will actually be lasting changes to how the industry works or how production works that might come out of COVID.
Well, I'll jump in. We've, again, it's a little bit what I was just speaking about being able to use the collaborative energy around managing the pandemic. We're adapting to the pandemic. I don't know that it's very manageable, but it's something we're adapting to. And sort of using that energy to redirect it to other areas of concern, whether that is sustainability and green production, whether that is focusing on inviting and welcoming people from a variety of different communities into the production industry, or whether we're looking at preserving filming locations. I think there's any number of areas where we're certainly looking at it actively as an industry association as, so we've managed to do this, which looked impossible at the beginning. Let's turn our attention to these other issues that we've been talking about for years, but is there a model here that will help us move forward? Because we've kind of honed our collaborative skills over the last few months. We need to keep them there. They've always been there, but they've been brushed off and freshened up, I think.
Yeah. 100%. And absolutely. I mean, there was the pandemic, and then there's also just the movement globally, but certainly in North America and both the United States and Canada, around social justice, Indigenous people of color's rights, and the barriers. Certainly speaking just specifically to motion picture that have always been there systemically. So. With that spirit of collaboration and people knowing each other in our community within British Columbia, I mean, we have, but it's really deepened for sure, and across the country, and even into the United States in terms of the relationships we built and had with the labor organizations and or the labor reps and the studios and their government relations and PR people. There is absolutely a wave happening where people are saying it's time. Well past time. And so there is a lot of work being done in British Columbia, led again by Prem Gill. She's amazing. But not just Prem, everyone, because this isn't going to be one organization or one person that's going to make the change, both in terms of sustainability, environmentally, in terms of our society, etc. And so I do think that's something that will stay, ever the optimist. But that sense of seeing, what a small group of people can do, and then adding to that, and that it is possible to make that change. So I think again in the vein of, seems to be the word that we're using today, is that sense of collaboration. And there's also just mental health and people, how this has affected people's mental health. And there seems to be a softness in terms of that building within the industry, in terms of making sure that there's space for people to be moving through everything that they're moving through, and making accommodations, as there should be again for that. And looking at how we've done things. I mean, even from working from home, and production offices getting going, and again, I'm going to refer to more of the larger studios, but just the amount of people and equipment and food and all of those things, is to say, do we need all that? Can we do things differently? Can we be smaller? Can we be more streamlined? I think we're going to see that as something that hopefully will stay.
Awesome. And Hugh, do you see, in terms of Nunavut and the Northwest Territories of productions there, do you see any sort of potential avenues for change coming out of this? Do you want there to be change? What's that situation like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's several answers, different answers to that question, because I think definitely that we've Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, we've become much closer during the pandemic. We we've, in a way, we've mirrored the task force that exists between the provincial and territorial funding agencies. So we actually have a task force between ourselves and our friends in Yellowknife and in White Horse, and so that's a huge positive. I mean, the what's kind of really holding us back, and we were kind of moving along well with it, was our relationship with Greenland. Language and culture of Greenland and Nunavut are very similar. And we were working hard on lobbying to allow Inuit technicians from either Nunavut and Greenland to be able to cross into each other's jurisdictions and be recognized as, in Nunavut's case, a Canadian spend. And you know, that the impetus that we were trying to grow has kind of stalled a bit, because while we can fly, you can fly to Greenland, but then you get tested at the airport. But obviously, coming back from Greenland, you arrive in Canada, you get, you know, you have to self-isolate. So it's just, there's the whole logistics of our relationship. And we work across the Arctic. We work with the Sami Film Institute, you know, we work with Sochi in Russia, we work with Alaska, and things were going well, if I can put it like that, before COVID, and that we've really kind of slowed down that impetus. And the other big impact that's really COVID has had with us, even though there are no cases, there is a general nervousness in the communities about people coming from other communities. And we embarked on a 3-year training workshop strategy where we were visiting communities, we were giving them training, we were doing master classes, and really the whole object was to grow the industry, to show that it's possible that you can be employed and work in the screen-based industry in Nunavut. And you know, in January we had 2 workshops lined up before March. We had to postpone them, and obviously we haven't been able to carry out any workshops in the communities, so we've had to move online with training videos, webinars, but again, what's become increasingly not apparent is the bandwidth issue in Nunavut. We are underserved ridiculously by bandwidth in Nunavut, and I think it's been evident throughout the world the increased reliance on good internet connection. Well, we're actually taking part in one now. It's fascinating. I could only probably be able to do this in a couple of locations in Iqaluit, because I know that the bandwidth will hold up to be able to carry on with a Zoom call. Now, that's not possible in other communities. And, you know, and it's really, really underlined the disparity and the impoverishment of internet access. And that's something we are lobbying hard to try and see what the potential is for the future. I mean, you know, without going on about it, we can't wait for low Earth orbital satellites to be available in Nunavut, because we are underserved at the moment.
Absolutely, and I think that's such an important point to make. You know, up north in Nunavut, and also a lot of reserves in Canada or Indigenous communities do not have equitable internet service. And to your point about the sort of international collaboration that was really gaining momentum, absolutely true. I think a lot of us have felt that, especially in the Indigenous industry lately. And I think it's so important that we remember that we have a responsibility to continue to advocate for these kinds of things and make sure that they aren't sort of forgotten or pushed to the side during the tumultuousness of COVID. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, and that we have to make sure our sector remains strong in all aspects throughout this craziness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're going to go to audience questions now. Got quite a few in the side here. So our first question is, so have any of your regions implemented things like having to sign a COVID waiver, or signing something to say you're either going to follow the rules or you're COVID free? Has that been implemented, or has that been talked about being implemented in any of your regions?
We're using that in Manitoba. It's part of the guideline, and it's very quickly became practice on sets. And even some of them are have a sign-in process every day. Okay. So you're basically signing off to say, yes, I took the online screening test that the government has made available, and no, I have no symptoms, and sort of reconfirming that. And yes, when you sign on to a production, you should receive, as a worker in any role, you should receive the protocols for that particular production. The odd time when people are new to the industry, we've had a couple of calls where they have the impression, particularly if they were dailies, they might have the impression that things are not working the way they expected them to. Then we're really encouraging those people to reach out to their supervisor and request the protocols, and then and read them and understand them, and because it is everybody's responsibility is basically what it comes down to. Now, I'm sure it's very similar for you, Marnie. No.
Yeah, for sure it is, and there's a couple of different levels. I'm sure it would be the same there, where there's the acknowledgement that you've gone through the screening process, but there is also, we are finding some questions regarding the in-depth 3-page document that some of the studios have around testing, and what you're sort of signing away for testing. And as always, depending on who you are, where you're from, how used to you may or may not be to looking at legal documents like that, we are working with the labor organizations as well, because it can be quite overwhelming. Some people just want to go, whatever, I'll just sign it. And other people are like, sorry, I'm giving what to who? What's happening here? So
Bruce Ford? No.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like the sixth born is going here. And so, we understand it all. Everyone understands the process, but it's to that point of, let's just slow down for a sec and make sure that what people are signing off on, that they're aware of it, and again, we've got amazing labor organizations here in British Columbia, great labor reps that come from production that understand this, that work very collaboratively and stand by supporting their members. So it's come up, and there's been, it's gone back to the studios and they've revamped it, and it's come back. And again, it's like, no one's ever worked in this business model before, right? It's not like the government, the studios, us as human beings on this earth have ever worked in a business environment around a pandemic. I mean, unless you went through whenever that other one was a century ago. But so what we're seeing, and I'm starting to, I'm sure we're all experiencing, is we just have to cut each other some slack sometimes and say, let's just take a step back. No, I don't think there's malintent here. Obviously, we know everyone, particularly again, the studios, with all due respect, are very litigious for a reason. So, but there's humans on the other end of that. So we're just trying to work in that space. And I think we're seeing a varying degree from crew who are comfortable with the health and safety protocols. Others are not comfortable, or they have someone who's immune compromised at home. And I mean, it really is very complex, and there's a lot of considerations to be made for everyone that's working in this environment. So yes, my long-winded answer is certainly we have them in BC, and some of them are just around screening, depending how much testing is being done, what zone you're working in, if you're working close to camera or not. And that's still being worked on with each production in terms of the agreement with the United States labor organizations and the studios, and how that is interpreted here in Canada, different country, different jurisdiction, based on our numbers and our government's outlook on asymptomatic testing. So.
I was just going to add maybe briefly that we've talked a lot about very large productions so far, and I just wanted to make a note about documentary and factual production or very small independent productions that are working with smaller teams. What we're seeing in Manitoba is that they are also adapting the guidelines, and we do have a section, sort of supporting considerations for commercials and documentary production. And certainly the guide that the Documentary Organization of Canada put out is very fulsome and helpful to that size of production. But it really speaks to the individual concern and responsibility. So if you're working with a subject as opposed to actors, it's kind of the same rules apply, except you may be in that person's home. And there's sort of this whole other layer of consideration in terms of, even if you're only bringing in a very small team of 2, 3, maybe 5 people at the most on a large, production. So I just want to note that it is not just the very large productions that are dealing with this, but all the smaller ones. And we do our best to be there to help guide where we know that there's going to be less resources, so on a smaller production, it's going to be the director and the production assistant who are responsible for making sure, that everyone's wearing their mask, that they've got the hand sanitizer, that they're cleaning, and it's extra duties, really.
Yeah. That actually sort of feeds in nicely to the next audience question. Someone's wondering about how funding is working in your regions for these new COVID-related safety costs. Is that something, are there different funding programs available from the government or from organizations, or is that a cost that's generally sort of having to be eaten by the productions?
Our development team absolutely, I'll use the overused word of pivoted, again, around funding, because obviously there was a number of programs that were in place, and our passports to markets and other programs that we're fortunate to have in BC, run through Creative BC, really pivoted in terms of trying to make sure that it was actually meeting what was happening with the pandemic and COVID-19. And we've got a great team, Erica Kumar and Matthew Perry as part of our development team that run those programs. And we were fortunate enough just recently to have a new domestic funding program in British Columbia as well. But in terms of the actual costs for, masks, gloves, etc., those are not, certainly within any of our incentive programs, are not seen as something that are applicable. I'm assuming that's sort of what the question was, is like, is there any? Now, there may be through some of this, our development and funding piece, but I'm not so certain about that.
And Hugh, you mentioned earlier the new funding program in Nunavut that you developed to encourage, sort of staying at home and still producing a project. So are there plans for that to extend into the future? Is that a limited time thing? Are there other sort of funding streams you're planning on implementing?
Well, if no one's listening, my hope is that that we can continue with it, because it's proving to be extremely successful. And I think that that fund will become part of the package of programs that we have, looking forward to the future. And I think, well, obviously we're so different from BC and Manitoba, but I think what has taught us as well is that we have to be way more flexible in future. That the world that existed in 2019 is not going to come back. We are still in a process of an evolution of different ways of expression, which we need to be in tune with. And this is going to carry on for several years to come. And I think it's kind of, where I work, it's our responsibility to be aware of these changes, and to be nimble enough to be able to react and adapt.
Absolutely. And I'll take this opportunity to applaud all three of you and also your colleagues and collaborators for how well you have taken on this huge and stressful task. You know, everyone has adapted so well and pivoted, so much. I know we talk about it a lot, but it is really impressive how everyone has come together to kind of try and work through this. So I think we have time for one more question from the audience. So someone wants to know if the scheduling of productions, how the scheduling of productions has been affected. So on a day-to-day level or a larger scale. So are less departments allowed to be on a production at once? Maybe are less productions even allowed to come through the province at the same time? Have there been changes like that? I mean, I know Nunavut has no outside production. So how is BC and Manitoba doing with that?
So there's no limit other than the fact that there's only so many crews and studio spaces, etc., which I think we passed that a few weeks ago here in British Columbia, but we always will say that we'll try. So there is absolutely protocols in terms of, the different zones that we hear productions talking about, Zone A and Zone B and Zone C. And trying to really look at how many people need to be on set, whether it's going to be an exterior or interior set. So there for sure has been protocols. It really, of course, depends daily on the production, what you're shooting, what the scene is, what the location is, etc. And again, obviously, I think the smaller productions, those are some of the more the domestic productions, some of the Hallmark productions, and some BC domestic productions were actually first out of the gate in BC, which was really nice to see because they were here. There was no, they didn't have to worry about bringing anyone in. We've got, great cast and crew here in British Columbia. So they were sort of the first out of the gate to figure that out. But yes, there's new protocols in place so that people aren't all in the same space, hanging around together. And there's thought put into that by each of the productions. What's been nice, just quickly to say, is that we're hearing from our municipal film offices and even some of the team that we worked with at WorkSafe BC that have, had filming down the street from them, or there's been filming on Plaza that said that, everything they're seeing is that it's extremely impressive how crews have adapted and that they really are wearing PPE safely, social distancing, that it's a very different production than what they saw before. And they really are noticing the difference, and that the level of commitment the crews are putting in to making sure they're following all the health and safety protocols.
I think it's been very similar in Manitoba to what you've just described, Marty. And again, it is dependent on the individual productions. The responsibility is on the employer and the employees to keep things safe and to organize in a way that will allow us to work during the pandemic. And what's really clear is that there is a commitment across the board to make it work. And again, we said it before many times already today, but it is about collaboration and communication so that we can keep working and find our way through this really unusual period. And I just wanted to pick up on something that Hugh said about this. It's also an opportunity for innovation. And since we've all had to pause, and we're going to have to keep pausing from time to time as we adapt, because that's how adaptation works. We also need to pause and think about how can we do things differently? What's our opportunity to make some changes in the industry that will make us stronger, more sustainable, more inclusive? What are these new storytelling opportunities in front of us? And being attentive, I think, to all of those opportunities is what's really going to carry the industry forward in the coming years.
Absolutely. I think those are great words to end it on, a little bit of optimism, and yes, making sure that we do keep that in mind, that despite the hecticness, the chaos, the tragedy, there are still opportunities here to enact positive changes to our industry. So thank you so much, Marnie, Hugh, and Nicole, for being here.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate for sharing your knowledge and your experiences through this time. Yeah, it was great to talk to you and to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, and to my colleagues and to the Imaginatum team, and congratulations on pulling this off in such an odd time.
No, congratulations. I've really enjoyed the sessions. I've been tuning into most of them. Really good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, my congratulations as well, and thank you. And it was a pleasure to have a conversation with everyone this morning.
Amazing. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.